agenda this morning, so I want to jump right in. Let's start off with public comment. Milan, I think you mentioned that you had some comments you wanted to make.
Y'all to have for your record. You do with it? I promise we must read from this. We have to answer that until the time we go to watch.
Sir.
This morning.
Next block.
Ron?
Nice jacket.
Hey, you too. Nice coat, man. You're looking sharp.
Got his
Come on,
Okay, well, good morning. I'm sure you got a full agenda today, so I'll try not to take up too much time in public comments. For anybody who doesn't know who I am, Milan Michalik from 12 Grant Road. We're quickly approaching the ETJ of Bernie. I want to speak to you today about the future of water by going back in time. Water history of Bernie may begin with the rocks that we live on today that were formed during the Cretaceous period 145 to 66 million years ago. Now, obviously, there's not enough time to go back that far, so I'll abbreviate these comments. It was the clean, plentiful waters of the Guadalupe River, Cibolo Creek, and their tributaries that attracted the early European settlers to the hill country in Bernie in the mid-1800s. Our situation today was captured succinctly 40 years ago in a passage in the book Historic Images of Bernie by Garland Perry. And he describes a situation where we cannot continue to drill more wells deeper and more often, and that's going to be a limiting factor in the growth and development of Kendall County. Now, to their credit, the leaders of Bernie recognized this reality many years ago, and today diversified water supply, primarily from two area lakes, one near and one from afar, use a relatively small quantity of groundwater. And cited on the Groundwater Conservation District, it's very important. We appreciate that. Taking this multi-source strategy one step further, the introduction of treated wastewater for irrigation shows it can reduce drinking water demand. As a practical matter, cities like Wichita Falls, Big Spring, and El Paso already know this water can be made drinkable. In the near future, San Antonio will likely join them as it discharges copious amounts of water treated into the San Antonio River. And when I'm going to go back to 1852 and talk about the city of Bernie that was laid out by Thiessen and James. 2 years after the city was begun, a dam was put into place. It's the Mill Dam, commonly called the Duck Pond. And I'll talk more about that later in my comments. There are a number of other comments I could make about the development of city wells, but the bigger picture came out in 1964 when the city purchased 120 acres for a lake, city park, excuse me. It wasn't just for recreation, it was also for the water below it. By owning the land, the city owned the water below it. In 1978, the John D. Reed Dam was dedicated at a formal ceremony, and a new source of drinking water augmented the city wells, which today number 9. Texas law recognizes that water in streams and water courses is the property of the state, and the city's right to their water in the lake was not secured until 1974, when adjudication of water rights to Cibolo Creek by the Water Commission was completed. This action also included the Mill Pond on River Road, when Bernie presented evidence that the dam was constructed by early settlers in 1854. It held 55 acre feet to provide water to power grist mill. Subsequently, it had been used for recreation since 1954. Consequently, a permit was issued for 55 acre feet for recreation. So now we have surface water, wells, and then ultimately in 2006, GBRA began to deliver treated wastewater. When considering how to meet the future water needs of Bernie, there's a temptation to simply find the next big water source. Yet a significant source cannot be overlooked. This begins by remembering that the city has a right to the water behind the Mill Pond on River Road. That is, if it actually had water in it. I suggest a portion of the reclaimed water produced in ever-increasing quantities be piped into that pond to keep it full. This would eliminate the polluted eyesore seen by anyone who visits our town and restore this pond for its intended use, recreational use. The water could fill the creek over its entire length to create a river walk reminiscent of San Antonio, a waterway that only flows year-round with treated wastewater from saws. By applying what we learned on this project, someday the same reclaimed water can provide a sustainable solution to meet future water needs by sending it to Bernie City Lake, where it would be treated drinking water standards as an indirect potable reuse project. Believe it or not, this is not a new idea. City staff introduced it as a potential future water source on the 10th of November 2006 at the Bernie Chamber of Commerce Water Forum. Specifically, it was to augment City Lake with recycled water, cost $14 million. I sincerely appreciate the work of this committee that you've accomplished so far, especially as you have all highlighted a simple premise that less is more through water conservation. Lower demand is lower cost to the city and thus to water customers. In conclusion, I look forward to your recommendations that are expected to result in a proposed long-term strategic and functional plan of water for Kendall County, guided by the resolution that created this citizen-led collaborative effort. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Melinda. Bob, would you like to make some comments?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Robert Imler, 215 West Bandera Road, Bernie. I'm going to be reading this morning for my first set of public comments, prepared statement from Dr. Alex Rudd, who unfortunately is not able to be with us as she's stuck in another urban cesspool in the state of Texas, that being Dallas-Fort Worth, much like the one to the direct south of us. That was my editorial comment, by the way. The subject of water continues to be a growing concern in this community. Regardless of how future water supplies are negotiated, swapped, borrowed, and renamed, this one fact will not change. Kendall County cannot sustain urbanization. I will repeat this statement again. This entire county is a unique and environmentally sensitive watershed, not another vacant lot in Houston. Our karst geology makes our groundwater extremely vulnerable to direct contamination from a number of sources, including contaminated runoff. This is not receiving the attention it deserves. Based on information I recently received, it appears the water quality testing may not be as extensive as needed, considering regional growth and increasing contamination and risks. I will be looking into this further. I asked the members of this committee to review the entire transcript of Dr. George Venny, expert hydrogeologist, who has studied this area extensively. The recent approval of WCID-4 to supply water outside city limits was obtained with 2 votes. Count them, 2, that's all. Many residents are upset about this for several reasons. The WCID concept has devolved from its original intent decades ago to supply water to small communities such as Comfort. Today, it is misused, manipulated to enable developers to build higher density developments in the county, outside both city limits and the ETJ. These projects affect the water supply for the entire area by impacting recharge and contaminated runoff. The water they receive may be granted by the city. However, the city also draws 21% of its water from Trinity Wells. The net water consumption and impervious cover from this higher density project with over 800 homes is no benefit to a region faced with a water crisis. In this case, it would have been far better for the region to build out this tract according to Cow Creek groundwater well acreage requirements. Instead, the residents of Kendall County watched this WCID be approved by 2 votes, despite the obvious fact that this project affects all of us. This should have never happened. Are we preparing for a future without the Trinity Aquifer and the environmental consequences? San Antonio has already demonstrated how reckless they can be, as they more than doubled the allowable impervious cover over the Edwards recharge zone to 65%. This was done for one purpose, to serve developer interests. The expert opinion of hydrogeologists continues to be ignored. And now I'm going to editorialize. Expansion of water resources for this county, for this city, will be done for one reason, and that's simply for greed. We have a sustainable water source. We need to protect that. We need to ensure that we do not exceed our available water. And quite frankly, the citizens of this county are going to be very, very vigilant. And I would tell you, based upon the recent elections that we've just had, we now have, unfortunately, we now have a state representative and a state senator who, quite frankly, and I've made this statement publicly before, are bought and paid for by the Texas Builders Association. They don't have our interests at heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Anyone else like to make comments? All right, Ms. Deaver,
Good morning.
good morning.
Thank you for allowing me to speak for a few minutes. I haven't approached the committee for a long time. I would like to ask you all to possibly consider in your findings as you wind down this committee, I'm assuming pretty quickly in the next few months, whether we actually need a huge amount of additional water. I was part of a group that went to Austin in 2019 that fought for counties to have a law passed that took away the right of municipalities to involuntarily annex. So your last large annexation was before that law went into effect. City will not have voluntary annexation. So from this moment forward, your annexation process is determined by the will of the city to provide services to developments and through development agreements. Recently, WCID number 2, Esperanza, bought an additional piece of property that was noted in the October 11th City Council meeting that they are going to provide additional water to the WCID. It's not annexed, it's in a development agreement. So from here on out, we are going to be providing water from Bernie via development agreements and voluntary annexations. You determine your own fate. You determine the use of the water that you need by what you're going to do in this area, in county land that's being purchased by developers. So I would like to have that thought factored in as to why we're going after large amounts of money to possibly do large piping just for developments. And it's not really making a whole lot of sense for the people that already live here to have to pay for that. I will be in the ETJ when the next census comes through. So this makes a big deal to me. It says I have no vote for what the city does, and I have no sway to sway them, but I will be paying for whatever they decide as far as their possible processes for future water. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Deaver. Anyone else like to visit, offer comments? I don't see anyone, so I'm gonna move directly into our action items. This morning, we have David Sloan with Freese and Nichols here to speak about direct potable reuse. I think, Mr. Sloan, you're gonna kick us off.
All right. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Do I need to share my slides here, or are you going to project them?
It would be great if you could
Yeah.
share your slides here.
Okay.
Screen sharing is available. Does he have screen sharing ability? Yeah. David Sloan. Let's see. So David, at the very bottom, if you were to mouse down toward the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a share
Yes.
screen. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that.
Excellent. We can see your screen.
Okay, you can see it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Well, good morning. I'm happy to visit with you and talk about one of my favorite topics after my granddaughters. I've been privileged to be a part of a field with exciting developments during my career in the water supply and treatment field. We'll be talking to you specifically about potable reuse. In general, though, I understand water reuse is already an important practice in Kendall County, but I thought a quick reminder of reuse drivers would be appropriate. Reuse does represent a drought-resistant supply, which we've seen more and more the impacts that droughts can have on our water supply. So that's a critical factor. Discharge requirements are causing us to treat wastewater to higher and higher standards, and so that makes it more attractive as a water supply source. Another nice thing is that as cities grow, that supply only increases. And then the supply is near population, so it doesn't require moving water long distances as other future supplies may require. And then again, related to the drought, we have seen climate conditions that we just haven't experienced historically, and so there is a lot of uncertainty about how some of our water supplies will respond in the future. We look at types of reuse. There's a lot of different ways to practice water reuse, but just wanted to break it down into some categories because they affect some of the regulations that come into play. We generally break down water reuse between direct and indirect, and in Texas, that's affected by whether that is actually discharged to a water supply of the state first, or whether, which would be indirect, or if it is piped directly to the entity that's going to use that reuse. And in each of those cases, we can have examples of non-potable, such as your Purple Pipe reclaimed water system, which would be a direct non-potable system, or if that is used as a water supply for municipal uses, including potable. When we get to the indirect uses, that there's a lot of water rights questions that come into play. Generally, if you're doing direct reuse, the water rights are not so much an issue. When we look at some of the drivers that push us toward either non-potable reuse or potable reuse, these are just some of the key differences. With non-potable reuse, that's typically very seasonal. So you're going to have much higher irrigation demands in the summer, of course, whereas potable reuse can be practiced year-round. The non-potable reuse is strictly demand-driven. An irrigation customer is going to take what they need for their particular irrigation demands. Whereas a potable reuse system, you're generally producing water as it becomes available, and you're blending that in with other sources. You'll have separate transmission system to, your Purple Pipe system for a non-potable system. Whereas with a potable system, you're generally, relying on your existing water distribution system. With you've got specific system customers for your non-potable system, as opposed to, all the users would be customers of a potable system. It does require greater treatment, and to varying degrees, the public may be a little skeptical going in. But we've seen great acceptance on the non-potable side, and with education that can be achieved on the potable side as well. There's a lot of different ways that that potable reuse has been practiced, and just about all those different ways have been practiced here in Texas. Starting with what we call unplanned or de facto reuse, and I've listed a few places in Texas, but really just about any river you could identify as having some level of de facto reuse, which is just where a wastewater discharge goes into a stream, and somewhere downstream, somebody takes that water back out and uses it as a municipal potable supply source. But certainly there are obvious examples in the Rio Grande, Trinity, and Guadalupe rivers. With surface augmentation, we are talking about intentionally piping reclaimed water into a water source such as a lake. Some examples of that are Lake Louisville up near Dallas, Lake Arrowhead near Wichita Falls, but we could look at a number of others as well. In North Texas, there's kind of a unique thing that's been done at a pretty large scale. It's river scalping, where entities are using water rights from their own discharges, and they're pulling that water back out of the river, passing it through some artificial wetlands, and then blending that back in with their other raw water supplies. Groundwater replenishment. El Paso is a great long-standing example of that, and hope Gilbert will mention that in his remarks. But that has been done since the 1980s in the area near El Paso from one of their from the Fred Hervey plant there. Then we'll look at a couple of examples of direct raw water blending, where purified water is directly blended back into raw water going to a municipal water treatment plants. And then in the next presentation, Gilbert will be talking about the direct finished water blending project that El Paso is moving ahead with. In Texas, we don't have specific potable reuse regulations. However, projects have been going forward on case-by-case basis. The legislature just, last year directed the TCEQ to prepare regulatory guidelines, and I just found out yesterday that they have been published this month, and so there is a new regulatory guidance, direct potable reuse for public water systems. That is available from TCEQ. It doesn't really set out any new regulations or anything, but it does wrap up what they have, the processes they've been trying to consider as they do look at individual projects. They'll still be looked at case by case, but there is now a comprehensive guidance that that covers that process. When we look at treatment for potable reuse, there's a lot of different approaches to that, but what I want to emphasize here is that is a multiple barrier approach, which is a philosophy that's been practiced in the water industry for a long time. And it looks at just trying to improve the water at all steps of the process, including the source water protection, keeping that source as clean as it can be, chemical and physical treatment, and then disinfection requirements to remove pathogens, which are organisms that can cause diseases in humans, and then maintaining a distribution residual. In reuse, we look at the same types of things that include your sewer use protection, your pre-treatment requirements in the sewer system, so that your municipal wastewater is as free as it can be of any pathogens that are not going to be properly treated in the process. And then multiple steps of treatment. The types of treatment generally fall into a few broad approaches, but there are numerous combinations and sequences within this. One is a reverse osmosis based approach, or membranes that are used as the primary source of treatment. Another approach is to use ozone disinfection and granular activated carbon, generally in combination, but again, those can be kind of mixed and matched with membranes, as you'll see in El Paso. Some have advocated for natural treatment systems. Wetlands do provide some stabilization. They don't, at a large scale, they don't treat all the things we might be concerned about for direct reuse, but they do provide an important step. When we start looking at obstacle and reuse, I want to emphasize that there's a long road in implementing a potable reuse project. There's public perception. There's substantial investments of money. There's a series of regulatory steps, and so it really requires an institution, maybe a combination of institutions, to work together to go through this process. You really need some committed people and champions to really make that work. With public perception, it's kind of a natural response that doesn't sound like a good idea to a lot of people at first blush, but there are specific risks that we have to manage, particularly the pathogen risk, but there are effective treatments, and we've seen those implemented successfully, and with proper public education, we've seen very favorable responses, as we'll see in a couple of instances. Just to highlight a few specific examples, again, These are some of the constructed wetlands up in North Texas where both Tarrant Regional Water District that serves the Fort Worth and surrounding cities, and the North Texas Municipal Water District that serves a lot of the area north and east of Dallas. Both have their own wetland systems. They're drawing water out of the Trinity River based on flows that their facilities have discharged upstream into the Trinity. And then after the water passes through these wetlands, it proceeds then to their raw water storage reservoirs. Wichita Falls is a pretty unique case here. They were treating water from a brackish reservoir, Lake Kemp. They have an RO facility that is doing the desalination for that water. During the drought back in the early 2010s, the water in Lake Kemp kept getting saltier and saltier, and eventually was no longer within the treatment capability of that plant. As their freshwater reservoirs were continuing to decline during that drought, they sought approval and did a lot of testing to demonstrate that this facility could be temporarily repurposed to treat their treated wastewater effluent. And they were eventually able to get that approval. They used this facility to treat up to 5 MGD of purified effluent. They were blending that with 5 MGD, billion gallons per day of raw water from their reservoir, and then sending that combined raw water then to their conventional water treatment plant. They operated that facility in that way for 1 year, from July of 2014 to July of 2015. This is the intermediate, this is the water coming from the RO facility going into an on-site lagoon at their plant, where it's, again, that's blended then with their other raw water and treated through their conventional plant. They did add a RO disinfection step that's shown here in the picture on the left for additional pathogen removal or inactivation. And then, over that year, they treated 1.7 billion gallons that was added to their finished water supply. They did operate that plant at full capacity during that period for all but 13 days. And they did that in tandem with really extreme levels of conservation during that period. And it did help get them through that drought. And the public acceptance of that was really, quite amazing, to the extent that people were really disappointed when they turned it off after the rains came, and their freshwater reservoirs returned to full. People saw that they were actually getting better water with the operation of that facility than otherwise. They did, as their plan was all along, they then went to what they saw as their permanent potable reuse, which was to pump their effluent to Lake Arrowhead, which is one of their freshwater reservoirs. So after the conclusion of their emergency DPR, they went forward with the indirect potable reuse augmentation. And then that RO facility was able to be returned to its original intended use to treat water from Lake Kemp, which is a brackish supply. The next facility I wanted to highlight was the Colorado River Municipal Water District. We were pleased to participate in this project, and their raw water production facility in Big Spring produces 1.8 million gallons per day of purified water, and that has been running since April of 2013. You can see here in the red shaded area is the Big Spring, this is the city's water reclamation plant. In purple, next door is the raw water production facility that was constructed by the municipal water district. And the product water from that facility is piped into, they have a raw water pipeline that's going from Lake Spence to several of their customer cities. The district provides raw water to a number of cities in the Permian Basin, and each of those cities have their own municipal surface water treatment plant. So, this is kind of a generalized view because each of those water treatment plants are separate for the different cities, but goes through the cities, in this case, city of Big Springs, normal wastewater treatment processes, and almost all of that water then is transferred over to the raw water production facility, where it goes through membrane filtration, reverse osmosis, and advanced oxidation with UV and hydrogen peroxide. And then that's blended back into the raw water pipeline, blended with other water, and then sold to the various municipalities. This is just a layout of the treatment building, just showing the three processes. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but this is the microfiltration system, removes particles, and then the reverse osmosis system, which is removing salts and other chemicals, and then the advanced oxidation. This is the UV reactor, and hydrogen peroxide is injected just upstream of that to create a very high level oxidation that can treat some organics that might escape the RO process. So we have technology now that is, very, very well proven, that can, that's very capable of treating wastewater effluent to drinking water standards. There's a lot of hurdles to work through, but it's been done, and it can be done going forward. And I think we're starting to see a lot of interest across the state as we continue to have high growth and recurring droughts. And I'd be happy to take questions. I know we don't want to linger too long before Gilbert gets to speak as well.
Right. I'm sure there are quite a few questions, and I'm not sure whether we're better off moving forward to getting Mr. Trejo's as well, and then you guys kind of jointly handle things. That might be a good way to, you guys can tag team together, and there's a lot of information that he's going to provide that collaborates with what you've already provided, David. So if you don't mind, and if you've got time to hang on with us, I'd appreciate it. And Gilbert can take us into the next phase of the discussion, and then we can have some time for questions, if that's all right.
That's great.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Gilbert.
Good morning. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay.
We can see it, thank you.
All right, and great, then I'll get started. My name is Gilbert Trejo. I'm currently the Chief Operations Officer overseeing treatment and production for El Paso Water in El Paso, Texas. Prior to my role as a COO, I was the Chief Engineer for El Paso Water, and I also have served 2 terms as the President of the Water Reuse Association, a national organization with the goal of achieving advocacy and education for water reuse and championing projects all across the country for communities where water reuse makes sense to solve their water-related issues that they're facing. Today, I'm going to give a presentation on the project that David alluded to, which is our advanced water purification facility. Getting to hear a little bit of your all's meeting when I joined on, this is very relevant to the situation that you all are facing. In El Paso, we're moving forward with our advanced water purification project simply as another means of diversifying our water portfolio. Now, you all have surface water and groundwater sources that make up your water supply. Similarly, in El Paso, we have a surface water source from the Rio Grande. We have 2 groundwater aquifers that we use. We have a brackish water aquifer that we use for desalination as well. We have a current water reuse program where we use water recycling for golf courses, green spaces, industrial uses in El Paso. We also use it for groundwater augmentation, where we treat wastewater to drinking water quality, and we inject that water directly into our aquifer where our production wells then take that water up. We've been doing that since the 1980s. We also have a very strong conservation, longstanding program in conservation that really picked up steam in the late 1980s, early 1990s, where our conservation programs range from twice a week watering in perpetuity. I understand that several communities across Texas are now doing some level of drought, have implemented some level of the drought management plans that limits watering, but in El Paso, we do this in perpetuity. That's just one form of conservation. Lots of education, a lot of education in the schools, in public spaces. We have our own education center, which I'll talk about here in a little bit too, to really drive home the point of the benefits of conservation. Every gallon of water stored is a gallon saved for the future. And in the future, in our plans, in our 50-year plan, we do have a plan to import water from a neighboring groundwater basin in Hudspeth County, county immediately adjacent to the east of El Paso County. Our story in El Paso is one of evolution through water reuse. These, as David alluded, these are not simple projects to execute for your community. The ick factor, the yuck factor is very real. We learned from a lot of case studies and examples out in California when they wanted to start doing these types of projects, the pushback that you will get from a community when it comes to this. But in El Paso, we've have a story to tell in terms of why we're doing advanced water purification in the form that we're planning to. In El Paso, we're proposing what I call the maximum level of water recycling, where we will take a treated wastewater from our wastewater plants that will immediately feed an advanced water purification facility. And unlike the other examples David noted, where they may use this highly treated water to then augment raw water in a reservoir, they could augment water in a river, they could store it in a groundwater basin the way we do in El Paso. We plan to take this highly treated water and blend it directly with our drinking water distribution system in our tanks, and it'll go straight to our customers. So this is direct to distribution, advanced water purification. It makes sense to El Paso. There's a lot of details behind why we're completely closing the loop in our urban water cycle, and doing this has a lot to do with the groundwater quality that we have in El Paso. Our river in El Paso does not run year round. The Rio Grande runs dry for the better part of 9 months out of the year. Water is only released for agricultural purposes, so we don't have a river to blend with. Our reservoir is 150 miles north of El Paso in New Mexico, in another state, and that complicates matters as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into why we are doing direct to distribution advanced water purification, but there's a story behind it, and this really helps and really did help with conveying this program and this message to our customers as to why this makes sense, because there's a lot of education that goes into it. So as I mentioned, in El Paso, we've gone the full gamut of water recycling, and the fate of wastewater, of a cleaned wastewater from just plain disposal, as a lot of communities do right now, disposal into clean and disposal into a river, a creek, or a stream. But we've also do reclaimed water, as I mentioned, and aquifer recharge, as we do here, as David mentioned, I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, the next step is advanced water purification. We are in the final stages of design of our facility. This is a rendering of the facility. It has not been constructed. It will be going to construction in late 2023, early 2024. So this is a rendering of what the facility will look like. And complementing what David mentioned, so the advanced water purification process in El Paso that made sense for El Paso, and this is part of the regulatory framework that Texas allows us to do. There is not one blueprint that makes sense for everybody, and I believe this is a very good way to handle these types of projects. But in El Paso, these are the treatment processes that are being daisy chained together, back to back to back, to achieve a reliable, safe water for our customers. In most cases, you would see one of these treatment processes could be the heart of a water treatment plant that maybe just treats a surface water or treats a groundwater. In this case, as David mentioned, there is multiple barriers that we are using to achieve the level of treatment and reliability that we want to, in order to achieve the high quality water and reliable water that our customers deserve. In terms of multiple barrier, these are the constituents that we are focused on and that customers do have the most concern about. Micro constituents includes pharmaceuticals, includes chemical contaminants that may be coming from industry, that may be coming from non-point sources. As you can see, our treatment process has 3 different processes that fully remove micro constituents. In our case, the reverse osmosis membrane process, very effective to remove 100%, 99% to nearly 100% of all of these constituents. So the ones that follow it are what we consider polishing treatment processes. When we piloted the facility, we were seeing that these other treatment processes are really, there's nothing left for them to remove, to treat, chemical contaminants to destroy. But nonetheless, this is the level of treatment that we have chosen to do to achieve such a project. I mentioned the pilot facility. This is very typical to these types of advanced water purification projects. The pilot facility not only serves as a proof of concept for the utility, for ourselves, but for our operators to start to familiarize themselves with these treatment processes. But it's also an excellent public education tool for the public to come tour the facility, and they themselves can see what is it that we're doing, how, and what we realized was once folks were able to tour these facilities, they became much more comfortable with what we were doing. Number one, the ick factor goes away. So these pilot tours went a long ways towards eliminating this thought that there was a direct connection from the toilet to the tap, which we found out through a lot of surveys. A lot of folks aren't savvy and don't really think about where water comes from. So when they hear these phrases like toilet to tap, some folks admittedly were worried. Oh my God, I really did think there was a direct connection. It's not the case at all. They get to see the water quality that we're starting with, which is already a very clean, clear water that is discharged safe to the environment, already meets a lot of regulations tied to the Clean Water Act set by the EPA. So it's not even a turbid, dirty water at all. It's already a clean water that we're starting with that's very safe for the environment. And then it's that water that then gets treated to this very high standard with these advanced treatment processes. So a pilot facility serves multiple purposes and is a requirement for a lot of the states that have a regulatory framework for advanced water purification. Talking more about public acceptance. So we wanted to go the extra mile for acceptance to ensure that the utility is being held accountable and that we're being held in check per se. So a independent panel of experts was assembled thanks to the National Water Research Institute. They were in charge of being this third-party research entity that oversaw our data, oversaw our concepts, oversaw the execution of the project so that we could then have their support. At the end, what we were asking from this panel was a general letter of support saying that El Paso Water was doing things correctly, safely, and to over and above level of excellence is what we were seeking from them. And this panel of experts were comprised of water quality experts, water treatment experts, chemistry experts, microbiological experts, experts in industrial treatment, which is a big part of it, which I'll get into here later, and public outreach experts. Again, these folks, world-renowned and experienced in these types of projects. And we did assemble them, and they did provide a letter of support for our project. Part of the recommendations that came out of that project, of that support letter, was what we're referring to as our partners in purification. So one of the keys to these types of projects is ensuring that the wastewater that will be cleaned is already as clean as it can be. And it sounds a little counterintuitive, but a wastewater just of residential, composed of just residential wastewater is much cleaner than a heavily industrialized wastewater, for example. So we do have industry in El Paso. We have refineries, we have dairies, we have food processing companies, metal plating companies. So we outreach to all of our industrial users and customers in our system, and we brought them to the pilot facility, gave them a tour, explained to them what we're doing and why, and the importance of them meeting their treatment requirements at their facility before they discharge anything into our wastewater system. Again, very informational for them. Again, the idea has been partners, not so much this overreaching regulatory menacing sense where that's not the type of relationship we have or though we want with our industrial users. But again, this Partners in Purification program is a good step towards ensuring that the wastewater that we will be treating with these advanced processes is as clean as it can be. Again, improving water quality, this is another step that we took in addition to the Partners in Purification. We made more stringent the water quality requirements that industry can discharge into our wastewater collection system. We changed the local limit of the maximum amount of biochemical oxygen demand being to 300 milligrams per liter. This was a necessary step that we had to take. Industries did have to do, some industries had to take additional measures to further clean their wastewater before they discharged it into our wastewater collection system. But nonetheless, through the Partners in Purification program, this was not a surprise to them. We worked with them to give them time to install the necessary treatment that they needed to achieve this new goal. But this was, again, a necessary step that we had to take to assure the highest quality wastewater that would then be cleaned and fed into our advanced water purification facility. I think operators and training of the operators is another thing that is very important for these types of projects. Advanced treatment processes, a lot of facilities maybe don't have advanced treatment processes yet anywhere in their treatment portfolio. So training of your operators and maximizing the training so that they get both a water and a wastewater operator license is something that we're striving for in El Paso. We're working with the state to help us get these dual licenses because it is not simple. They require a lot of experience, both at wastewater and at water treatment facilities. We're working towards that with the state. But again, training for operators is something that should be considered when these projects are being developed. In the end, in El Paso, we have an 84% in favor of our advanced water purification facility. Again, this is the direct to distribution. Took a lot of effort, a lot of education, took a lot of time. Again, our water reuse story started in the 1960s when we had our very first drop of treated wastewater hit the first golf course in the 1960s. And then that grew and evolved over time, as I mentioned, but we were able to leverage all of this information to our customers, all the public education that we've done in schools. We have now a generation in El Paso that has grown up being very water conscious, which I believe all has helped achieve such a high number of approval for our project. Again, stakeholder engagement, not talking to public officials, talking to the school districts, talking to the medical community in El Paso. A lot of social media advertisements and information that we've used social media to put information out there for. The media plays a big role in how they present information. So we took a lot of time to educate them on what is it we're doing, what is it that we're not doing. Took them to the pilot facility as well to try and remove the sensation, trying to remove them from wanting to sensationalize this. It still happened. A headline is a headline. Everyone's looking for a headline, but it did go a long ways to ensure that at least what I'll call very misinforming information or just wrong information wasn't being spread. And then we did achieve that. Still trying to get them to not say toilet to tap or try not to say El Paso will be drinking their wastewater, which that statement itself is categorically false. This is not true. We're not drinking our wastewater. We're drinking a highly advanced, clean wastewater and a water ultimately that is cleaner than anything that we're producing currently. And again, in the facility itself, here's another rendering of what the facility is going to look like. It will include a full education center on the inside that we will continue to bring stakeholders, community members, elected officials into our facility to learn from what we're doing, why, learn about the treatment processes through this facility. And again, we have a current facility right now at our desalination plant where we do the similar level of education for the schools and for the public. These projects are expensive. There's no getting around it. These are expensive projects. The cost of this water is up to 3 to 4 times the cost of our current water that we're producing. For these reasons, we have had the opportunity. We have been fortunate to have received federal funding from the Bureau of Reclamation for these types of projects. The good news is that there is a lot of money available right now, grant approved and authorized to the Bureau of Reclamation for them to award to communities doing water reclamation projects. So we were fortunate enough to receive $20 million here recently for this facility. And again, timeline for us, as I mentioned, this this facility has not been constructed. However, if you look at the timeline, we are at the tail end of design. We are repiloting the reverse osmosis membranes one more time. Since 2015 to now, technology improves quickly. There are new membranes available. We are piloting those new reverse osmosis membranes, so we can get them approved by TCEQ, that ultimately improve the operation of the facility. So we're doing that into 2023. We're hopeful by late next year to early 2024, this facility will go into construction, and we'll be producing water to our customers by 2026. That's the end of my presentation, and jointly with David, we'll be happy to answer any and all of your questions.
Thank you, Gilbert, and thank you both of you gentlemen. A lot of information. I'm sure there are quite a few questions. So we start. Tommy, anything on your end? We'll just work.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. On the groundwater replenishment, is that via recharge or is that via a class 5 injection well? How's that? Tell me a little bit about that in the treatment criteria. I'm assuming you're taking it back to primary drinking water standards before you put it back in the ground, but I don't want to live on that assumption. So
you are correct. So we are taking and treating the wastewater to a full drinking water quality. We then at the inception of the project, we did use injection wells, and I'll say by mechanical means and by pressure means, we would inject the water into the aquifer. We did that for about 5 years before we completed some geological studies that allowed us to do some infiltration ponds. So again, we're fortunate in El Paso where there is the geology present, where we can simply dig to a certain depth to create a pond, and then we simply discharge our water into the pond, and it will infiltrate directly into our aquifer and recharge it. So we started with a mechanical injection means. We no longer do that. We now use infiltration ponds for that.
very good. And if I may, one more, the pharmaceuticals, does that fall in that micro constituents category, or can you tell us a little bit about treating that? Because I know folks have some reservations when it comes to that.
Yes, it does. The answer to your question, yes, it does. My pharmaceuticals are part of the micro constituents. There's other contaminants of concern that fall under micro constituents as well. When we did the piloting plant, we went ahead and tested for the entire list of EPA's list of micro constituents, but they keep a separate list of unregulated contaminants that they're tracking themselves. They're not yet regulated, but they have a list of those. We spiked our treatment plant to prove that any future regulated contaminant of concern will also be removed by our treatment process as well. So we were always seeking to go above and beyond to be able to answer all these questions for our customers and even for ourselves. For example, if a new industry comes into El Paso, sets up shop in 20 years, understanding what contaminants or chemicals they may be working with, we want to make sure that our treatment processes could remove those. So I hope that answers your question. David, do you want to add anything else about micro constituents and emerging contaminants?
No, it's always a moving target, but kudos to El Paso for the approach that they're taking on that.
That sounds wonderful, actually, and very much advanced and forward thinking. If I may be indulged with a couple more. So relative to cost, I know you guys also do some brackish water desal. So I'd like to gain a little bit of understanding, if you can share with us, Gilbert or David, if you have any experience as well, looking at those costs, what the finished water cost ends up being, whether you put that in MGD or 1,000 gallons or acre feet. I don't care what unit you put it in. I'm just curious to understand those costs so we can, as part of our evaluation, consider what that might be compared to other sources.
So I do have some costs here for you, and they are in dollars per 1,000 gallons.
Okay.
And I'm going to list these for you. So our initial, the cheapest water, the least expensive water that we can produce is from the freshwater part of our aquifer. This water simply needs to be pumped from the well. We chlorinate it and off it goes to our distribution system for consumption. This costs us 85 cents per 1,000 gallons, 85 cents. And we do have some of those wells in operation still currently, but that's 85 cents. Surface water treatment. So when we do have water in the Rio Grande, this is water, the headwaters of the Rio Grande is in southwest Colorado, but when we do have surface water, we treat that using ozone and granular activated carbon, and that costs us $1.25 per 1,000 gallons. Desalination, our desalination facility, again, from brackish water, treating salty water from the aquifer. This is $1.40 per 1,000 gallons, and that's for desalination. And again, these costs include full treatment and operational costs. So this includes everything. And this advanced water purification facility that I just presented on now, the projection of the cost to produce this water is $4 per 1,000 gallons.
Very good. And those are operational costs. Does that include a capital component or capital replenishment component, or is that in addition to that, those numbers?
Just to make sure I understand your question, future capital investment to keep the
I guess
plant
I'm
going,
thinking
like a
of-
full life cycle cost?
I'm really thinking more, for example, on the advanced water facility, pay debt service on the bonds and then payment. Does that number go down over time, or is that just all operational and maintenance costs? Is that O&M or an INS item?
O&M.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Tom?
Gilbert, just had a question relative to the pilot plant itself in those early stages. Any information you could share with the costs related to the pilot plant and how you secured that financing?
Yeah, so we paid for the pilot facility ourselves. We wanted to get moving with the projects. We could have asked for some assistance again through the Bureau of Reclamation. There's the possibility of them supporting some of the piloting. But we chose to move forward and we paid for it ourselves. When it was all said and done, construction of the facility, we operated it for the better part of 9 months. That cost at the time was about $6 million is what we spent on it. Now, I do want to say that it was elevated in a sense that it was in a large tent. It wasn't your typical pilot plant that you would run for a treatment project. It was done in a way that that we could facilitate tours. It was in a large enclosed tent that was air conditioned. It was much more than a typical pilot plant.
Mm-hmm.
We rented all of the equipment that we needed, so we did not purchase it. I will say I've got lots of lessons learned, as you can imagine, but I wish we would have bought all of that equipment, because we would have kept using it for additional piloting. We could have used it for other purposes, but we chose to rent at the time. In hindsight, we just should have bought it, but that's the cost was about $6 million. We operated it for 9 months, but it was a much nicer, I'll say, pilot facility than usual.
Good, thank you.
Anything else, Tom?
That's good.
Well, I'm good. I don't have a question.
Ben?
Yeah, a few. So you said you have closed the loop essentially in El Paso. And so what percentage of the water is going to direct potable reuse?
That's a great question. About 6% of our total water at any point in time in our distribution system will be this advanced water purified water, 6%. As you saw in our water portfolio, we have a substantial mix of water at any point in time between Rio Grande water, water from these 2 other aquifers that we have, desalinated water, and now we're introducing this fifth water source and blending that occurs. Just as a sidebar, I didn't have a slide in the presentation, but the blending of all of these sources, the water chemistry balance that has to be achieved is extremely important. You could have a water quality incident where if you don't have the right balance, you could create a red water incident, meaning that you're leaching iron probably from your pipes. Very similar to what happened in Flint. So blending of all of these water sources is extremely important that the chemistry is done correctly. As part of our pilot plant, we did harvest pipes from all different parts of the city. And we did a pipe loop test to ensure that we were achieving the right water chemistry and the balance needed to ensure that we didn't do this. This is important because all of the public outreach that is done to get folks' confidence in this project could all get thrown out the door if you have a water quality incident in your distribution system, like a red water incident, for example. So balancing of all this chemistry is extremely important.
So another way of asking this sort of same question is, if you had say 100 gallons of wastewater treatment plant water that comes into your advanced water purification system, what % comes out as reuse water, as in direct potable reuse water?
So of the 100, I'll say, well, then let me answer in actual numbers, and maybe this is a way to answer your question. So in our wastewater treatment facility, we currently discharge into an irrigation canal, and our effluent is used for irrigation purposes. This is 39 million gallons per day of our current effluent goes to irrigation. 39. We're going to take 10 million gallons per day of that 39 and redirect it into this advanced water purification facility. So we'll be feeding 10 million gallons per day into our facility. That 10 million, after reverse osmosis treatment, there is some losses that are realized because of the treatment processes themselves. We'll be putting out 8 million gallons per day into the distribution system. I hope I haven't lost you all. But ultimately 8 go into the distribution system, and that 8 is the 6% of all the water that is in our distribution system that goes to our customers.
Okay, that's very helpful information. Thank you.
And I'll just say that 80% is a pretty high recovery. In a lot of places, it might be limited to 70 or 75%. So it takes an extra effort on the RO to achieve that high of a recovery.
So El Paso, of course, you guys are doing this. I also am familiar with Oceanside, California. It sounds like they've got a plant that just came on. Pure Water San Diego, I think, is also they're working on some. So it sounds like some of you all are really piloting and figuring this out, such that we don't necessarily have to go through the learning curve that you're undertaking. Is that fair to say, or is undertaking a pilot project necessary for us in our region?
It's necessary because it's part of the regulatory framework here in Texas. When you are proposing to use advanced treatment processes, such as RO or I believe ozone still falls into that category. David, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to pilot. Right. The framework also is very flexible. So the first thing any community would do is go have a conversation with TCEQ and their experts and explain to them what you want to do, why the proposed treatment processes. You'll already have an engineering consultant with you to facilitate these discussions. But their framework is tailored to each community. David touched on it in his presentation, but I would be surprised if they would not require a pilot. I think the benefits that you all would face is, again, a lot of the lessons learned, a lot of you don't have to choose from several different processes. The engineering community is very educated and up to speed nationally on everything that everyone is doing. These types of projects are being piloted not only in California, but out in Atlanta and in Georgia. These and along the East Coast, they're doing surface water augmentation as well, and groundwater augmentation. So The benefits will be realized, but I believe that a pilot is inevitable. David, what do you want to add on? to that?
So TCQ is going to require a demonstration of the processes. If you don't do a pilot study, you'll have to do it full scale when you've already basically spent all your construction money to build the facility. And then, so you're at a very high risk to do that without a pilot. There are savings that you can get in the piloting process. El Paso chose to use their pilot as a public education facility, and it was very effective to do that. But that does, add a level of cost to the pilot beyond the, just the technical portions of it. So there's trade-offs there. But it was a very effective education tool.
Okay, so I think this is my final question. So our treatment plant, our newest one here in Bernie, currently treats, I believe I think it's called Tier 1, is that correct? Treatment standards, so that it's purple piped out to the community and can be used, any time of day, out in yards, et cetera. Does that give us a shorter path or an easier path or a more affordable path to DPR, to advanced water purification?
I would certainly say it's an enhancement on the public education side in particular, and it, depending on how that quality is achieved, if you're able to take that water and pass it through the additional steps, it would be a head start on the process.
I would agree.
And so if you say it's a head start in the process, then in our case, I find myself thinking, well, then it's maybe a matter of adding carbon filtration, reverse osmosis. I mean, because we already have some UV. I think, Mike, man, you tuned in a second. Our current treatment is we have UV on it. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
And do we have oxidation? I'm sorry. Yeah.
We have oxidation, filtration, and UV.
Okay, oxidation, filtration, and UV. So in other words, it seems like it could, if we were to do a pilot plant, it seems like it could be almost a scaled down. We don't have to do all the steps. We have to do the steps that it takes to get to direct potable reuse. Is that fair to say? Just want to make sure.
That's fair. Yeah, I wouldn't want to prejudge, what additional steps would be required without, more knowledge of your facility. But yes, what the cleaner the water is to start with, the better off you're going to be.
David just nailed it. And in other communities, you all are well on a better path. There are other communities that don't do any reuse, don't do of any sort of anything, and then they want to jump straight into something like this. They have a ways to go. I would say definitely you all are on the right path, or on the path to achieve this.
Mark, do you have any questions?
I have just more of a question of curiosity. I think you touched on this, Gilbert, but from a pre-treatment standpoint for some of the industry, you had to require them to get to a higher level of technology as you transitioned in. Is that what you basically said?
Yes. Not all, but some did.
Did you facilitate that transition, or was it basically, hey, you have X number of years to get where you need to be, or we can't accept your discharges any longer?
The latter. We gave everybody 3 years, and this was an open discussion with them. Again, from Partners in Purification, the initial discussion, this is what we're gonna do, this is what we're piloting. Fast forward a couple of years later, hey, we're seeing that our wastewater quality is not as good as it needs to be. And in order for us not to take on and make our treatment even more robust, we asked them to carry the load. So we adjusted that 300 milligram per liter BOD limit in a discussion. How much time do you need? What does it mean for you? We provided technical expertise to them because a lot of them, the big industries, we have Coca-Cola in town, we have Marathon Oil in town. They knew what to do. No issues with them, frankly. It was a smaller, I'll say mom and pop type industry that would struggle, that we've never had to do anything like this. Some had very minor treatment and had to go to higher level of treatment. Some had no treatment at all. And now they have to incorporate treatment and operators. And it was a whole new part of their business that they never had to deal with. So we facilitated and provided expertise to them, our own experts. We made our engineering consultants available to them to help get them started on their own path. Ultimately, they had to hire their own technical expertise to help them achieve this, but it wasn't an open conversation. We did give them 3 years. And honestly, there's still maybe 2 after the 3 years that we're still working to get their units online. We just needed to make sure nobody was dragging their feet. Nobody was just trying to put this off. Once we knew everyone was on the right field, we worked with them and we didn't want to cause any more issues to them that we knew we already were, but they understood this is where our community is going. This is water that they may be drinking, their families may be drinking, depending on where they lived in El Paso. So it was just time. One of my first slides said diversification over desperation. We had time in all this. This wasn't we got to hurry and do this or else we're going to run out of water. If your initial message is one of fear, you're going to get nothing but fear in return and pushback. So in our case, we were fortunate. We had time to do all of this. This project conceptualized in 2010. It took 2015, 2012 before internally it really picked up steam. We funded it through our capital improvements program. 2015 before we were piloting and the Partners in Purification project started. 2018 before we went to industry and said, you all are going to have to do a little bit more on your side to clean up your wastewater. So nothing was a surprise to anybody. From 2018 to now, everyone pretty much is up to standard. And as you can see, we're not going to be producing water out of this facility until 2026.
Thank you.
Mr. Mann, any comments, questions?
No, sir.
Right, Grant?
Thank you, Gilbert. Great presentation. I think earlier you mentioned you currently have a 84% public acceptance rate. I guess I'm trying to ask, how long did it take to get to that point? Did it start fairly low? And then was there ever a threshold or a percentage where you wouldn't, if you didn't get past, you wouldn't move past the pilot stage?
That's a very good question. We haven't, our story in El Paso is just so different. The very first survey, and we did it via a focus group. So we did via focus groups, how you collect the data makes a difference too. So we did focus groups from around the city, different groups, phone surveys. We collected this data many different ways. To our surprise and the surprise of the industry, our very first survey result was this 84%. When we did the same survey and collection of data and focus groups after the piloting, and that number grew to over 90%. I think we hit like 93%. And that was after the piloting. That was after a lot of information through the media, through social media. We really pushed that information. So after that time frame, it grew to over 90%. We don't use that 90% simply because well, a lot of time has passed. So we haven't done the survey recently. Certainly the pandemic occurred. There's a lot of questions now relative to viruses, remnants in the wastewater and such. But to answer your question, our first survey number was this 84% number. This is plenty high. This is what we're going with. But we do know that we achieved at one point as high as in the low 90s. I forget the exact number. I'm sorry. But our plan, to answer the second part of your question, our plan was to move forward and to continue with the focus group. So as part of the surveys and the focus groups, if we were not getting the support we're looking for, the why, and then really start working on what we can do to try and win these groups over as to what their concerns were. There was a subsect, a demographic that we just could not get to budge. So in El Paso, we are on the border. We're right on the border. There's a large influence of migrants and a lot of people from Mexico that either live in El Paso, spend a lot of time in El Paso, and they're part of the survey. And they're just culturally, they have no trust in a public water supply. They just don't. And we saw remnants of that in all the data that we're collecting. But it was a very small part of it. They just don't trust public water supplies, period. But that's more a cultural thing and really a lot to deal with their experiences in Mexico. But aside from that, the young generation, highly supportive. And we also saw from an age demographic, kind of the older the demographic became, the more skeptical they were. But I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I don't want to misquote, but that's generally what we saw. But to answer your question, if we would have had low numbers, we would have kept pushing through. Again, this is a project where we had time to execute. We need to have this water. We are in a water scarce part of the country. We must develop this new water supply. So we were going to move forward with it and just strive and ensure that we met we gained everybody's trust.
Anything else, Grant? Jeff?
You did a great job of answering my question about why it took so long. Well, I know these projects always take time, but yeah, I thought that was kind of extraordinary to be in the 14, 15-year planning and reiteration and the pilots and the public educations. I guess the question would be is if you had to estimate for us, if we wanted to do it a little quicker than that, what would still be a prudent time frame to look at?
Oh, wow. I'm going to say I'm going to throw something out there. Frankly, I'm just guessing. I would say 5 years is reasonable. David, I don't know what your estimate would be, but I think I would say 5 years.
I would say 5 years would be, a fast track for a project of this type. I would want to allow 10 years if possible, but you could put a timeline together that would probably get you there in 5 years, but it would be very aggressive.
And I would caveat what I just said, and I think what David just said. It really just depends on your community. If your community is screaming for it and is saying, go, 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 you have our support. It's just a matter of funding, proving your concept and your demonstration to the state, getting their conditional approval, and then how quickly you can design and construct a facility. But the variable there is your community. Are they ready for this or are they not? And the approach can really expand the time, because the other communities, if they feel that the project is being shoved down their throat per se and forced, you will get massive pushback. And now your timeline could become decades, like it did in San Diego when they first tried to do this. The whole moniker of toilet to tap came out of their experience, and it took them decades before they can get back on track. So that's the main variable. Where is your community in terms of acceptance? I'd recommend these focus groups, these surveys, start to get a feel for where your community is for this, because you'll be asked a lot of tough questions. Why are we doing this? So on and so forth. Is this really necessary? Can't we do other things? And so on.
Just as another data point, I'll say, we started the feasibility study for Colorado River Municipal Water District in 2004 and began producing water in 2013. So that was 9 years, and there were some stops and starts along the way, but I think it's typical that there will be at some level there will be some kind of thing that may pause the process.
Understood. Thank you. Just clarify the dollar costing that you gave us a while ago. And the final one was $4 per 1,000 on the new facility. And there was a question about clarifying, is that O&M and does not include capital? I think you said yes, that was the case. So this would be chemicals, equipment, labor, but not the cost of the physical plant itself.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate you guys bringing all this information. It's a wealth of information, and I'm pretty certain we'll have some follow-up questions. And hope that you guys will indulge us when those arise. In the meantime, could I trouble both of you to provide us with copies of your presentations? So we can have
I've already
those?
got them. and
You have them.
I'll
Thank you,
share-
Ben.
I'll share them with you guys.
All right, and I know we're running a little tardy, so.
We want a plant tour.
Here, I like that.
That'd be awesome.
I'll buy lunch, man.
Happy to host you all once it's up and running.
Again, thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. Next on our agenda
Thank
is
you.
Mark Robinson, the Texas Water Development Board. Mr. Robinson.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen, for having me today. My name is Mark Robinson. I'm with the Texas Water Development Board, a geologist with them. We recently completed a study of the Hill Country Trinity Aquifer and associated Trinity units. And I'd like to, the report has been published, report number 388. It's available on the Texas Water Development Board site. So if you could show the slides. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah. As a presentation, does it work, or should I just?
You should be able to click slideshow and it should work down where you were.
Okay. This study was a work of labor of love and several other people, including Alyssa Sudam, Evan Strickland, and Azah El-Kurdi, contributed tremendously to the end product. And I need to say, unless specifically noted, the presentation does not necessarily reflect the official board position or decisions of the Texas Water Development Board. So the Brackish Resources Aquifer Characterization System, BRACS, is part of the science arm, groundwater division of the Texas Water Development Board. We do water science and conservation. It's one of the three major goals of the Texas Water Development Board, which is funding, of course, science and data, and assisting with the Texas water plan. So we don't do regulation, unlike the TCEQ and other things. So we're kind of partners with you all, and look forward to helping you whenever you have data or science questions. But this slide just shows that we have many ongoing studies, and by 2032, we should have completed, or we're mandated to complete all brackish studies for all of the state's major and minor aquifers. We focus on data, which is a very big part of our studies. We look at the stratigraphy, look at the aquifer that are part of the study. We map the salinity, we do volume calculations as part of the process, which is not, and is totally separate from the mag volumes that you're used to seeing in water planning. So we need to be sure it's clear that these are for comparisons and evaluation of potential brackish projects and not part of your ongoing DFC determinations, et cetera. And we'll do brackish groundwater production zone designations moving forward. Those have yet to be done for the Hill Country and some of the other project areas. There's a lot of data. Okay, we pulled in over 24,000 well bores that penetrate the Trinity in the study area. And somewhere buried in there is Kendall County. you guys have lots of holes and these are just ones that we know about as well. And as I'm sure you're all aware, not all wells or holes or borings that have been done into the Trinity have been documented, although I think we're doing a better job these days than we have in the past. The stratigraphic framework we're talking about is the Cretaceous, as was mentioned earlier. And Kendall sits right in the middle of the outcrop of the upper and lower Glen Rose, which is near the upper part of the Trinity. And structurally, there are a lot of kind of historical geological events that have occurred that have created the hill country as we know and love it to be. Some of it's faulting and folding, some of it's depositional, and it's created a unique environment. One of the things that we did in this study and the wells that we used, and there are a total of about 1,300 wells that we actually did stratigraphic analysis on, is that we utilized something known as a geophysical well log. And these measure the properties of the rock. They're wireline tools that are lowered into the well bore and have different types of measuring devices. They'll measure the natural gamma ray of the rock or the electrical properties of the rocks. And they create these type of wiggly line traces, which give great insight into the actual depositional character of the rock and the fluids that the rocks may contain. And with these, we're able to basically delineate the different portions of the Trinity that we studied, the upper Glen Rose, lower Glen Rose. We broke out the Hensel sandstone, the Cow Creek limestone, Hammett shale, and then the lower Trinity units, the Sligo limestone and Hosson sandstone, and they all sit on top of a Paleozoic basement that's many hundreds of millions of years old. This map gives you a sense of the kind of the topography. We call it, it's an elevation map, but it's measured in mean sea level. And the base of the Cretaceous is the bottom where all of the Cretaceous sediments were deposited upon. As the sea level rose back in those days, it deposited limestone, sand, etc., onto a basement of the Paleozoic rocks, the old Paleozoic rocks. And you can see that where Kendall sits is probably a pretty flat basement situation at the time of the Cretaceous deposition. And a cross section, this is the A prime cross section, the red line across the structure map. Kendall County is outlined there, and the different little color bands that you see are the Trinity group, and the yellow underlying rock is the Paleozoics. The Paleozoics are generally very dense, metamorphic, some of them igneous rocks that really have low propensity for providing aquifer storage or any type of water production. And so the Cretaceous, that thin little strip on top is really where the groundwater exists within the study area for Kendall County and throughout the area. And this one kind of crosses from south from Medina County all the way up to Travis County. And that's kind of showing you the arch they call the San Marcos Arch. Okay, and we've heard a lot about potable reuse and the fact that El Paso is famous for being early pioneer of desalinization of groundwater. And there's many projects throughout Texas. Let's see. We have water chemistry. We reviewed some of that. Let me jump ahead a little because now we, for the study, first rely upon measured water quality. And this is water samples that come directly out of groundwater wells. The Texas Water Development Board has a program where they go out and measure and sample water wells throughout the state. But there are many other water samples that have been reported and are recorded in the groundwater database, historical groundwater systems, as well as the TCEQ in their public water supply system has many groundwater systems. And on occasion, we get private or data from different companies provided to us that we can include in our studies. But the map on the left shows where these water samples existed. Blue being ultimately they were fresh, yellow being saline. And the challenge is for our study, we also needed to analyze the water quality to the south of the study area where no water samples have been collected because the wells are too deep. Generally, they're oil wells that we're even drilling deeper than the Trinity. So we use the geophysical well logs and to calculate water salinity. And as you can see on the map on the right, it added a lot of points, generally highly saline, moderately saline type of wells. And I don't think I need to get into the science of how we do that, but it's available in the report. And it's not a mystery. It's been well documented. And I think we've utilized existing science and between us and some work that was done at the Railroad Commission over the last 30 years or so, 20 or 30 years, we've got pretty good at it. So we've, for the maps ahead, the color code will be basically fresh, which is your to drinking water standards of less than 1,000 TDS, which some people may like. If you're just getting water from the Edwards, you'll see it at 300 or less, but others will not be so lucky. Highly saline, 1,000 to 3,000 is the bright yellow. That's good for irrigation, industrial purposes, et cetera. Moderately saline, 3,000 to 10,000. You're kind of getting at the upper limit of really usable water. And the 10,000 TDS is the base of user quality. User quality water is defined by the Railroad Commission for injection wells and other things. So greater than 10,000 TDS is very saline. We map that. And below that is brine, where it's basically seawater level concentrations. And we have a series of maps for the different zones, the Upper Trinity. And if you see Kendall County, you have pretty much where the Upper Trinity, which is the Upper Glen Rose limestone, is pretty much fresh, though on the western edge, you do get a little bit of slightly saline water samples. These maps are a little bit smaller, but we see the lower Glen Rose. This is all Middle Trinity units. Lower Glen Rose is fresh, predominantly fresh. Hensel, you do find in Kendall, slightly saline, and Cow Creek. I don't know if I can minimize this for a second. We'll see that you have a mixture of fresh and slightly saline. And then you move into the lower Trinity units, the Sligo and the Austin. And again, if we want to focus on Kendall County, we'll have predominantly slightly saline water, and again, predominantly slightly saline water for the Austin sandstone. And we won't get into aquifer properties. Volumes, these are general volumes that we found in our study, and there's a lot of water in the Trinity. Now, these volumes are in place volumes. They're not water that can be produced because you can never squeeze an aquifer like you can a sponge or something. So they're only for kind of evaluation and not for like, oh, I'm going to get 90 billion gallons of water. And in the Cow Creek Groundwater Conservation District, I pulled this out of the report. So I tabulated for all the GCDs as well as on county basis. You can look at these numbers. But roughly speaking, we see about 3.5 million acre feet of total aquifer storage for fresh water. And slightly saline, you have about 6 million acre feet of saline water, which puts you in pretty good position. But again, that water is going to be deeper. And some of the Austin units, you expect to have a little less porosity and permeability. So there may be some issues with terms of producibility of the aquifer. So all of those things will have to be studied on a site-specific basis. But if you'll notice from the chart that almost 3 million, so about half of the slightly saline water exists in the deeper Austin sandstone units. And the sand thickness of the Austin, which I thought might be of interest. So again, I pulled this from the report. Is where it kind of terminates below ground. It'll get up to about 300 feet thick beneath Kendall County. So there's a good thick Austin wedge that sits in Kendall County, but it does pinch out to the north and thin. So these were general conclusions from the study. Probably too much, and these are general depths too. But again, I didn't have time to pull the numbers just for Kendall County, but we can, definitely take a look at that if possible. You can reach me at the Texas Water Development Board. We're always there for you. And the data is shared freely. All of it's public domain. Anything in this study is available to consultants, to private individuals if they like to use GIS systems. And I'm open to questions now or anytime in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I wanted to make sure we secure a copy of this. I know you did bring this with you. So if you wouldn't mind emailing that, because it does a nice job of summarizing key areas of the report.
Yeah, unfortunately, this slideshow is about 70 megabytes.
I'll grab it from you.
Okay.
There you go, if that's okay.
And then maybe you could share it.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, go ahead, Benny.
Yeah, that's all good. Yeah, I think you told me before this presentation that the data for Kendall County will be online soon on a online viewer data platform. Is that right?
No, we don't currently have that technology. The water board is investigating various platforms for online viewing, but the actual raw data files will be available for the study area, and it's not been
So we can
carved up.
drop that into a GIS program, like you said.
Yeah, if you're comfortable with any of the Esri ARC products, ArcGIS products, it's available, the shape files predominantly, and raster files, and point files and spreadsheets. So lots of different ways.
Other questions?
The water in El Paso that the prior speaker Gilbert talked about, that they're desalinating. Any idea on the concentrations, TDS numbers out there?
I haven't looked recently, but yeah, I think they're over 3,000.
Okay, okay.
Mark, your salinity data is kind of a snapshot in time. Is there any information about say vertical or lateral migration of that salinity or intrusion into other zones?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we looked at that carefully, and we did not do isotope studies, isotope ratio studies, which allow you to age, date groundwater to get a sense. But from other studies that have been done within the Trinity itself, the lower Trinity is old water. And we're talking thousands of years old. So it's not moving that quickly. And if you were to produce the lower Trinity in, probably Kendall County, you would not, it'd be an element of of water mining almost, is what we say for these type of aquifers, deeper aquifers with lower permeability. So you're not going to get a lot of migration or movement or changes in salinity over the lifetime of any project that you're likely to plan. Or in terms of vertical, we see a lot more vertical variation within the Trinity. And as you go higher up into the Glen Rose, the Cow Creek, et cetera, those aquifers are a little more dynamic in terms of being closer to recharge sources and impacted by surface water issues. And so that's a lot more of an open book in terms of if we were to produce, Glen Rose, what happens. And those studies are all part of our groundwater modeling groups, look at this aquifer. And so there's real issues in terms of surface water, groundwater interactions that are being investigated now. But yeah, I expect those are probably water that might be hundreds of years old, 1,000 years old. Whereas when you go deeper into the Austin sands, it's thousands of years old.
Thank you.
Ben, anything else?
And then I've got engineering questions, but I don't know that that's what I'd kick that way. But the other thing too, obviously, if we're talking about mining that water, I mean, it sounds like it could be a resource, but I question whether it's worth going after. And I don't know.
It's kind of a whole different discussion.
Exactly. And so I'm kind of biting my tongue, I guess. Well, I'm voicing them, but not trying to ask you.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer that because we didn't do that level of analysis. It would require drilling and testing and all of that.
Is that something that the development board will be doing, or, I know they sometimes focus on different areas.
Right. In general, I think that we like to support entities that do that, and there's certainly funding available to support that type of work, but I don't think we would initiate it. So if somebody came, like Kendall or Cow Creek Conservation District came with a proposal to the board, I think there's grants and low interest loans and stuff that they kind of like to match.
Okay.
Just a comment for the committee. It's not the point of Mr. Robinson's study, but as opposed to mining the saline water and desaling, which comes with, different types of disposal issues. The Edwards is currently partnering with New Braunfels Utilities on a demonstration project where they're using the saline portion of the Edwards and potentially the lower Trinity as a storage medium for aquifer storage and recovery for excess water. Full viability of that's yet to be determined, but it may be something to keep your eyes on, especially if potentially usable types of levels of salinity are available in Kendall County for the same type of project, whereby you would just store your excess fresh water in the saline to create a bubble for future use. just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we've kind of tossed around, but not knowing enough about the geology as to what we have available to us. And, you know, this is not an oil and gas area where we have a bunch of wells available that we, you know, kind of proven that we know we can come back and inject into. But it's still something that ought to be thought about. And if you have any more information or whatever, please.
As it continues, like I said, they're in a proving viability stage, but it's going slower than they originally anticipated. But I'm happy to share with, like I said, we're partnering from a technical perspective, so I'm happy to share with any results as they come about.
Hey, a question, more of a curiosity, if we don't have time right now, but how does that affect your statutory cap? Is it?
So what New Braunfels is doing is blending their supplies. So their Trinity Fresh, their Edwards Fresh, and I think some of their surface water. And since it's being stored in the saline, it's outside of the cap, so it'd be above the cap.
I thought, okay. Thank you.
Man, comments, questions? Nope. All right. Thank you, sir. We certainly appreciate your help.
Thanks, Roy.
We are very close on time. Kurt, do you want to?
Yeah, just real quick, we can just show, yeah, these two go that way for you and. I just wanted to show, and it's something that I mentioned a while back, about kind of putting together some maps. These are printouts, kind of apropos to the discussion just now about the ArcGIS data that we can get. This is an ArcGIS map database. These are just the printouts of it, so we can put this online and share this out with people. And we're trying to collect some of the data that we've been presented. You know, these maps, you'll see how a lot of the public water wells, all the CCNs, all the subdivisions within Kendall County. So kind of trying to encapsulate where water is being produced and used on a larger scale. Obviously, there's a bunch more wells in Kendall County for ag and domestic use out on the smaller parcels, but these are all your PWS wells and CCNs and big use areas are encapsulated in this. And so this is just, we printed 3 maps. All the data is actually on one map, but just so you can see kind of the different components that we've got in there, we printed 3 to make it a little bit more user friendly. But we have, just so y'all know what we've got prepared. And if you look at these and you see there's other data that might be missing or you want to see on there, but we can take this type of map and even bring in the map, the BRACS information of the layers. Once they make those public, you can put this right on over the same data and start layering that. And what I think we'd do next is probably put this up where it's accessible online, so you guys can go, because you can click on any of these things online and see the raw data for it and see which subdivision it is and which CCN it is and which pipeline it is.
Can we connect that off of our website?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, that'd be great. Thanks, Tony.
Yes, sir. Kurt and Ben, does the district have any groundwater quality data showing high TDS numbers from any of the monitor wells that might correlate back to the salinity study?
We do, I mean, we have all our water quality, and we do take the TDS numbers. I think none of ours are that high, you know, we're all in the 800s to 600s to 800s. I think most of our reports, when we get our monthly reports, but we do have all that data.
I was just a little surprised to see that Cow Creek having some moderately saline stuff, so, or slightly saline, so. That's just that, I want people to understand, I don't think that's salty, that's just simply, it has high total dissolved solids. It's very hard water. So, don't think of being at the beach in Port Aransas, so.
All right, good information. Yeah, look forward to putting that, maybe layering it on top of salinity information and other information that Water Development Board provided to us. Before we go, I'd like to circle up and talk a little bit about our next meeting. We've got a lot of information we've been given over the last several meetings. And I feel like we need to move forward with some output. So I think I'd like to have one more meeting so we have a consensus amongst the group about what should go in that report. Talk about some of the highlights of those things. It'll be very much a working meeting. If there's something else you think ought to be on the agenda, please share that. But next time I'd like us to, I'll regurgitate in the agenda what I've heard. If I'm missing something, let me know. But I'd like to go through each of those topics, talk about the highs, the lows, key points we want to bring out in the report. Make sure that we hit all of those that we of one mind generally before we start drafting.
Well, I guess a question would be, do we, kind of given just sort of the broad brush that we saw today on the BRACs, do we need, should we be looking any more into that? Or is that something that we once again pay a lip service to, but say, hey, maybe.
I think we go with what we know on it and say it's out there, right? We know also have some very, very rough figures of what other folks are doing. El Paso's doing this, Saws is doing this. We can pull data from them in terms of cost related information. Some of the drilling is just mechanical. It is what it is per foot, right? So a lot of that comes down to, and I think it's going to be a less expensive alternative than some and more expensive than others. Now, I think what we're going to do is we're not going to have comprehensive answers for anyone, but we're going to go provide a broad base of information with some anticipated highs and lows and ins and outs and some things that we like and don't like about each of these opportunities or possibilities. And then city council can come back and say, teach us more about this. We're interested in that. We're not interested in that. And then we can put all of that information together, hopefully in a final plan that becomes something that gets updated over time and will at least fulfill the first portion of our charge.
Okay.
Makes sense? Comments, questions? Nope. All right, then we're adjourned. I'll circulate dates. We'll try to get everybody together. I know some people couldn't make it today, but that's almost always going to be the way it is.